Well, for more on China's car makers and their ambitions, let's cross to Doron Levin. He's a Detroit-based journalist, author, and host of In the Driver's Seat on SiriusXM Radio. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, China is already making huge strides in the supply chain side and has also teamed up with foreign brands for some joint ventures. But what's a good strategy to actually sell Chinese cars abroad?
Well, I think that when we saw Geely come forward with cars, we've seen a capping of a process in which the quality and the reliability of Chinese cars has gotten steadily better over the years. What they really need is a brand that's known in the West. And so Volvo turned out to be a very good deal for Geely because Volvo needed capital. Li Shufu of Geely had that capital, and the Swedes were ready to work in a joint venture with them. And of course, Ford at the time really was under financial pressure, so they had to sell. But this was a very fortuitous move for Geely because it really gave them the ability to deal in the West with a well-known brand that has a lot of credibility and a lot of history and a lot of very, very solid and loyal consumers who know what Volvo is and want to buy it. I'm afraid that if China comes forward with many of its own brands, it will take a long time before people in the West understand Chinese brands and are ready to buy them.
Now, you mentioned this issue of quality. So what's being done to close the quality gap, both perceived and actual, between Chinese and foreign brands?
Well, it simply takes time. I mean, the Chinese companies did a smart thing 30 years ago when they made joint ventures with the Americans. This was really part of Chinese national policy, so that in making parts, in making components, in making completed vehicles, whenever an American or a British or a French or an Italian company wanted to do that in China, they had to do it in partnership with a Chinese company. So a lot of the intellectual property and understanding of how to make those systems work in a way that could bring great quality and great reliability to the marketplace, those were really passed kind of by teaching and osmosis. So it took a while. We saw here in the West, we would see Chinese vehicles 20, 25 years ago, and they were okay. They were okay, but they weren't great. They certainly weren't competitive. Right. And we've seen the gap close over the last couple of years as the Chinese companies have just simply gotten better at this.
Now, it can be a challenge for some Chinese companies even within the country. So what would you say are the other challenges that Chinese car brands face both domestically and overseas?
Well, I think, first of all, they have to resolve what is going to be a big change in the automobile industry worldwide, first of all, to electrification. And we know that China is very, very interested in electrification for a lot of reasons, principally because they don't really have China doesn't really have access to a lot of petroleum resources. So to put cars in electric mode is really a much better option for China. In the United States, we have really great resources in oil and gas, and so we really don't need to do that. But for environmental reasons, it's becoming important in the West as well. And so that's one issue that has to be resolved. The second issue that has to be resolved is the one of automobility, that is to say, autonomous cars and driverless cars. This is really almost upon us. And in China, you see, which is now the biggest car market in the world, you see that people are buying cars in greater and greater number. But very soon, cars are going to be operated by third parties, and they're going to be sold and transportation and mobility is going to be sold in terms of rides rather than cars. So I think that that's going to be a big adjustment for Chinese companies also.
Now, we're certainly seeing Chinese companies moving into other markets, whether it's emerging markets, whether it's Europe. So in terms of the countries or perhaps the regions where Chinese cars could have the most potential to grow, what are the standouts for you?
Well, I think, first of all, the United States is really big potential because it's very profitable. So you see cars coming here, for example, that are part of the joint venture with General Motors. Now, is it a Chinese company? Is it a joint venture? It's really a joint venture with, let's say, SAIC and GM. And they're exporting cars to the United States. And American consumers really don't object to that. And I think they're being well accepted by consumers because they have the same high level of quality that all GM cars have.
Now, in terms of how you see Chinese brands progressing, just quickly, how do you see it progressing in the long term?
Well, the long term, it depends on what you mean by the long term. I can't think of a single Chinese name of a car company that I know of or that any American consumer knows of. It's a very crowded market right now. So we didn't know for a long while, really what Toyota meant, what Honda meant, what Kia meant, what Hyundai meant. These are all sort of relatively new brands in the United States. For China to crowd its own brands, its native brands, into that market is going to take a lot of work and a lot of time. I don't think it is impossible, but it's not going to happen overnight.
All right, thank you so much, Doron Levin, Detroit-based journalist and host of In the Driver's Seat on SiriusXM.